I'd like to invite you to find a seat and to spread out as much as you can, please. Adonai Natan ve'Adonai Lakach. God gives and God takes. In this moment, we look around as we're here to celebrate and honor the gift of a life that was Jim Meyer, Avram Yaakov ben Moshe Leib ve'Rachel Leah, beloved husband, father, grandpa, brother, leader, and friend. We take this time to be fully present with one another. I want to invite you to check your cell phones and make sure they're on silent. Because this is a space of listening and of being with one another, as Jim did for so many. The family invites you to join them for Shiva tonight, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And we'll also be hosting visitors at the home of Rich and Erica Meyer on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 1 to 4 p.m. We are in this space, looking for comfort, turning to one another and to our tradition. Judaism reminds us again and again of the power of community and what it means to come together, to be together, to share memories, to pray, and to simply be. We'll begin with Psalm 23. Rabbi Sean Fieldsmeyer.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, v'hinot esher yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenach aleini. Nafshi yeshover, nafshi yeshover, yancheni b'magle tzedek l'man shemo, gam ki eleh B'geit zalmavet lo irara ki ata himadi shivtecha o mishantecha shivtecha umishantecha hema yanachamuni taroch lefanai shulchan taroch lefanai shulchan taroch lefanai shulchan neged zorerai dishanta v'shemen roshi dishanta v'shemen roshi dishanta v'shemen roshi kosire vaya achtov achesed yirdefuni kol yimei chayai B'shavti beveit Adonai V'shavti beveit Adonai Leorech Yamim.
A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters. God restores my soul, leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and loving kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of God forever. Surely goodness and loving kindness shall follow me for the length of days. That is the beginning of the long legacy that we have learned from Jim in his life. We'll spend the next bit of time hearing from Rich and Tom, from Jim's brother Les, his friend Mort, the eldest grandchildren, Ami, Dahlia, and Alex. Shauna, wait, did I get it wrong? Darn it. Middle, okay, fine. We do support, that's right, Dahlia, we do support the middle child. In fact, the oldest son isn't speaking, so, all right, we got it, okay. We'll share stories. We'll laugh. We'll come together. We'll hold this space to really honor this incredible mensch of a human being. Rich.
We have, Ezra did the middle child salute. So if you're a middle child salute. I'm the youngest. Welcome to Meyer Fest. That's the word Mom used and Dad. They coined in 1986 when we went on a family vacation to South Carolina. It was Dad's 50th and Marcia's 25th birthday. They were both born on March 29th. So Mom made t-shirts for us that said quinquagenarian and a half. Someone knows what that means? I didn't. So quinquagenarian means 50, a 50-year-old. And I knew what a half meant. So ever since, whenever our family gets together, the full complement of Meyers, we call it a Meyer Fest. So Mom made t-shirts to commemorate those special occasions that do not happen often enough. So who here is wearing a Meyer Fest shirt? Didn't your father tell you you should always wear a tie to a funeral? Well, today we're missing our most senior member. We're going to call it a Gym Fest. Dad was the most humble person I've ever known. He never sought attention or praise, but today it's a chance to give him his due, and he won't be able to shift the spotlight elsewhere. A couple months ago, Dad told me he had gone to attend a funeral of a friend, a longtime friend. I said, "How was it?" And he looked at me, and he had that kind of wry smile, which I can't really, you know that I kind of have that. And he had a twinkle in his eye, and he said, "Wonderful," which you might think is kind of an odd thing to say about attending a funeral. But he meant it. It was a wonderful celebration. And today, let's make this a wonderful celebration of an extraordinary human who touched the lives of so many people. We all know Dad was an eternal optimist. On a cloudy day in 1966, just a few months after I was born, he and Mom went with a real estate agent to look at a house for sale on Southwest Summit Drive. They went out, and the agent looked to the east on that cloudy day, kind of like today, and said, "Well, if you look out there, you'll see Mount Hood." And kind of hard to imagine that that's what it was. But being the optimist, Dad took his word, and they bought the house, and that's where they raised our family and lived for the next 47 years. Summit Drive became our shtetl. Not so many Jewish families, but it was our shtetl. And sure enough, when the clouds rolled away, Dad's optimism paid off. Mount Hood revealed itself, a stunning view that inspired him and us day after day, year after year. And 8 years ago, when Mom and Dad moved to a high-rise condo in the Pearl, Dad selected a unit that looked straight out at Mount Hood, a view Erica and I share in our house. And we share photos back and forth with Mom and Dad on a day with an extraordinary sunrise. So last Tuesday, when Dad was struggling to get out of bed, I went down to help him out and lend a hand. And sure enough, as Mom and I helped get his feet onto the floor, he looked out at the sunrise, and he was amazed. He said, "Look at that sunrise." And Mom said, "You say that every single day." The fog was sitting above the Willamette, and the sun was rising right above Mount Hood. He was amazed as if it was the very first sunrise he'd ever seen, and it turned out to be the last time he'd get to see that view. I hope that when I'm 85, I can keep that same sense of wonderment, even for things that happen every single day. As you probably know, Dad served on dozens dozens of community boards, both in the Jewish community and the greater Portland and Oregon communities. As someone shared with me just this morning, I'll quote him, what he wrote, "I got to help Governor Bob Straub appoint a lot of people to Oregon boards and commissions, but Jim always stood out to me as the best model of Oregon citizenship, a busy individual who gave generously of their time to advance the public interest." That was Dad. He got such great joy and fulfillment by helping to create and nurture and sustain institutions that serve the needs of all of us. Tom, Mark, and I have tried to follow in his and Mom's examples. I served on the board here at Neveh Shalom, and I was president for a couple of years. I frequently turn to Dad for advice on how to handle various situations and ask him how he would handle it. Almost any time I asked him anything, he would have a personal case study as if Harvard Business School had written this up based on his own experience. He'd tell me what the subject was, how he handled it, where that worked, where things might have gone differently. And through the years, I've talked to so many people throughout the community who have had exactly the same experience with Dad. That his quiet leadership and wise counsel would frequently lead to creative and inclusive solutions. His advice and lessons have helped me in everything I do. But beyond Dad's community leadership and his business life, what was most important to him was our family. No matter what he was doing, he and Mom always made it a priority to show up and support all of us at all of our events. Not just for me, but for Erica too, for Mark and Tom, for Marcia and Sean, for all of their grandchildren, and even more, all of our friends' kids. If it was important to any of us, it was important to him. My high school cross-country meets, an award ceremony where Erica was recognized, Avi's piano recitals, Dahlia's ballet performances. He traveled to Washington, D.C. with Orly for the Constitution team competition, model satyrs, soccer games, baseball games. Whatever it was, he was there, the proud father and grandfather, always supporting us, cheering us on. If it was important in our lives, it was important for him to be there. I think the most important thing that Mom and Dad did for us was make it a priority to have a family Shabbat meal each Friday, as often as possible. And a highlight of those Shabbat celebrations was when Dad would put his hands on our heads and give us the priestly blessing each week. As we grew, his hand grew higher and higher. And eventually, all of us surpassed him in height. He was 5'9". And when that occasion occurred, he'd kind of get on his toes and act like we were much taller than we actually were, maybe like Mike. When my brothers and I got married, he did the same for Marcia, Sean, and Erica. He treated them like his own daughters, which was so meaningful to each of them, especially for Marcia and Erica, both of whom lost their own fathers at a young age. In recent years, as Dad began to shrink a bit, he'd have to reach a bit further. During the pandemic, when we were unable to join each other on Friday nights, he would call us on Friday evening on the phone, and he'd bless us over the iPhone. And we'd take out our phones and put them over our heads as he recited the blessing. And in recent months, as it became more difficult for him to stretch his arms and to stand, we would bend down next to him so he could reach our heads. Last Friday night, as Dad began to fade, Mom and Mark were in the hospital with him. They FaceTimed from his room so we could all sing and celebrate Shabbat together. By the way, in case you're wondering, the challah was really good. Then, on Saturday, as Dad lay in his hospital bed, his breath becoming more faint, just before he finally took his final bits of air, Mark, Tom, and I placed our hands on his head and together recited the same blessing he had given us each week for our whole lives. Yisimcha Elohim ke'Ephraim v'cheManashe. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichuneka. May God cause his light to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord turn his spirit unto you and grant you peace. Dad's many blessings helped our family in so many ways and helped us live wonderful lives. May his memory be a blessing for all of us.
Tom.
The last time our extended Meyer family was in the same room, before this moment, it was the day of Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. The 16 of us gathered at the house at Arch Cape, and we cooked, and we ate, and we drank, and we laughed, and we played. It was everything Dad loved. What he loved most, it was family, walking on the beach with Mom, good wine, and beating us all in every round of Mexican train. On Thanksgiving afternoon, Dad told us he had something he wanted to share with all of us. So we all gathered around, and Dad sat on that L-shaped sofa wearing this shirt, this white long-sleeved Meyerfest t-shirt, and he looked out at the Oregon coast and at his entire family, at our mom, Laura, his 3 sons, his 3 daughters-in-law, his 8 grandchildren. I didn't know what to anticipate and whether it would be good or bad. Then Dad pulled out a blue folder and he gave each of us a copy of a single page he had typed up in 2006. It said that Rabbi Isaac had posed a question in his Rosh Hashanah sermon. It said, he'd asked, if you won the lottery and the jackpot was huge, what would you do? And then Dad had written this. My overwhelming reaction was to think, I have won the lottery many times. And then he had us go around the room reading aloud, one at a time. We read a list of all the ways that Dad felt he had won the lottery. Being born into the freedom of America, his loving parents, Larry and Ruth, his education at Harvard and Harvard Business School, the blind date who turned out to be Laura Rubinowitz, My grandpa Dave's chance meeting in a deli in Chelsea, Massachusetts, that led to Dad purchasing his first business, Goodyear Rubber and Supply. The list went on and on. So we read and we listened and smiled, and I think all of us were thinking the same thing. We are the ones who won the lottery. We won the lottery when we got a dad and a grandpa who was generous in the most loving ways. Dad understood what was important in life: education, home, time with family, a vacation now and then, and he made sure that all of us had access to those things. We won the lottery when we got a dad with wisdom to dispense. If you show up on time and you do what you say, that puts you in the top 5% of people. Take care of the customer, and everything else will take care of itself. There's no such thing as a free lunch. When any of us had a conundrum, a dilemma, a big life decision with no easy answers, we would say, "That's a grandpa question." And we'd call him and he'd listen carefully, and then he would tell you a story from when he was a counselor at Camp Alton. Or that summer he sold seeds for the Mandeville and King Flower Seed Company. Or what Mo Stein taught him when he was president of the Jewish Federation. Or some amazing book he had just read. And then he would help you come up with your answer. I won the lottery being raised by a man who appreciated the coincidences and ironies of life, finding a house with a view of 4 mountains on an overcast day, as Rich said, when you couldn't see past the backyard. He would tell you how he and Mom flew all the way to Hawaii and bumped into their Portland neighbor at the Starbucks. Or somebody who was a year behind him at Brookline High School. He would turn that minor interaction into a hilarious story, and it always ended with Dad's big, gasping laugh. After my bar mitzvah, my parents offered to buy me a gift. I said, "Great. Dad, I want a quadraphonic stereo with an 8-track recorder." Dad said, "Tom, are you sure you need 4 speakers? You only have 2 ears." But still he agreed, and we agreed to a budget, and Dad drove me from store to store, from Jafco to Sears to Hawthorne Stereo to Kita Company. None of them had a quadraphonic stereo anywhere near my budget. And I was sad and frustrated. And when we got back in the car outside one of the stores, Dad looked at me and he said, "Tom, you know, there's something called trade-offs. You have to learn to set priorities. You can't always get everything you want." Maybe. But I didn't have trade-offs when it came to dads. I had a dad who was a remarkable businessman and community leader, but he always had time to come to the Indian guides or fishing with me on the Deschutes. A dad who had a full and busy life, but paused to listen to every person he met. As my brother Mark put it, I had a father who was a great man, but whose primary mission in life was to make other people thrive at whatever they did. I didn't understand trade-offs because I'd won the lottery. Today, all of us feel sad and bereft and lost. But like that day at Arch Cape, today is also a day of thanksgiving, of gratitude for how all of us, everyone in this family, everyone in this room, Everyone hearing these words won the lottery for having Jim Meyer in our lives. May Dad's memory always be a blessing.
We'll hear from Les, Jim's brother.
Good morning. I'm Les Meyer, Jim's kid brother. My brother, Jim, was a prince. Since he was 10 years older than me, it was actually quite a while before I got to know him very well. We started sharing a bedroom when he was 12 and I was 2. And I was amazed at his powers of observation and analysis when he would come into the room and be able to understand and say, "You're not really asleep, I can tell." When he went off to college, I was still only 7 years old. He got married, and I was only 12 years old. He left for Portland. I was 14. And in those days, it was a little difficult to talk from Massachusetts to Portland. You had to call the operator, ask for the long-distance operator, give them the number in Portland, and the long-distance operator would then call the routing operator and get the routing to Portland, which included some number like 503, which was not generally available to the public. And then it would take a long time to get through. So it was a major event to talk from one coast to the other. My first real conversation with Jim, as a person to person, I remember very well. I was about 25 years old and living in the Boston area, and he was about 35, and he came to Boston on business, and we went out to dinner. And we talked over lobster at Anthony's Pier 4. And I thought, this is a really nice guy. And we've been talking ever since. He has always been interested. He was always interested in how I am. And he always asked about how things were going, what's new, how I was doing, what I was thinking. And when I married, and as our family has grown, Jim, of course, has greeted each new member and always inquired with genuine interest and love what they were doing, what they were interested in, and then he would remember the next time he saw them, whether it was 2 months later or 2 years later. How did that turn out? Everybody in my family loved Uncle Jim. So did everybody in Marie's family. As Marie's brother Elliot said a few days ago, he was a brother to us all. But before he was Uncle Jim, he was just Jim. One time when he was in his late teens, he was riding in a car with my parents, and the car got a flat tire. Jim got out and changed the tire. What was remarkable wasn't so much that he knew how to change a tire, but that he could do it, get back in the car, without getting a speck of dirt on his clean white shirt. For Jim's 16th birthday, my parents took him to the legendary restaurant in Boston called Lockover's. And he was given his choice of anything on the menu. He said, "I'll have a lobster Savannah." It happened to be the most expensive thing on the menu. He enjoyed his lobster Savannah. Came time for ordering dessert. "Okay, Jim, what would you like for dessert?" He said, "I'd like another lobster Savannah." I believe that Jim's first job was working at a shop that sold and repaired door closers. If you don't know what that is, you can see me afterwards. For his next job, he worked in a car wash. And there was that summer when he bought a 1947 or 1948 Pontiac sedan and worked as a traveling salesman for the Mandeville and King Seed Company. Everybody has a favorite story of Jim's wry, quick humor. So here's mine from about 1980. Jim was running Goodyear Rubber and Supply, and at the other end of the country, in Connecticut, I was running a small business that our father had started called Guild Industries. And I was chief cook and bottle washer. And Jim and I would talk regularly, and he said, in those days, copiers were not as common as they are today. And he said, we're buying a new copier. Do you have a copier? And I said, no, we don't. He said, I'll pack up ours and send it to you. So he did, and it came in a box about this size, and I put it together. There were a couple parts that had to be assembled, and I put in the liquid toner, and then there was a long roll of paper that I installed. It wasn't a sheet fed. It would take a piece of paper, print out a piece of paper, and then chop it off. So I decided to do a test run, and I copied a piece of paper, and this paper started coming out, and it kept coming out and coming out and coming out. Pulled the plug. I called Jim and I said, I'm just getting this long roll of paper without missing a beat. He said, well, we used it for copying Torahs. What were you planning to use it for? In the 75 years that I knew Jim, I never heard him speak a word in anger. Frustration sometimes, but never anger. When I would solicit his advice, he would start by asking me what I was trying to accomplish. What was my goal in making this decision? He would tell me what he saw as the options, possible implications, positive and negative, and then leave it for me to make my decision. He never said to me, I think this is what you should do. And when I did make a decision, he was never judgmental about what I decided to do. I always knew that Jim loved me fully and unconditionally, as I did him. In my mind, Jim set the standard, pure and simple, for how to live a life. I'm going to miss him very much.
Mort.
The Meyers and the Zalutskys came to Oregon in 1960 from Boston, Mass, in upstate New York. I assume you know who came from Boston. Neither of us had family here. Our wives met at a book club in 1961, which I think was organized by Lois. Okay, excuse me. Should I sit down now that I made an error? One day, Jim and Laura came to our house on a sunny Sunday, and we picked cherries from one of our trees. That day became the beginning of a lifelong and beautiful relationship. After the cherry picking, we became each other's family because neither of us had family here. Together, we celebrated all family events and all Jewish and non-Jewish holidays. In fact, we vacationed together, and we currently have a home in Archgate, as the boys refer to, one house away from each other. In this long-term relationship, I became the godfather of Tom. Jim became the godfather of Sam. And this week we found a picture of Sam's bris with Jim holding Sam and Rabbi Stanford standing there with his great smile and a glass of wine. To this day, our kids call Jim and Laura and Aud and me aunt and uncle, and the kids and some grandkids are good friends. We even have Erica and Sam with the same birthday. Last week, someone asked me what was one term I would use to define Jim. As the rabbi said, I used the word mensch. The definition of mensch is a person of honor and integrity. Jim is the epitome of a mensch. I would add to that definition Jim's other attributes: respect and general concern for others, empathy, philanthropy, intelligence, and a search for knowledge, and last but not least, a devotion and love as a husband for Laura and the children and grandchildren. Colleagues admired his integrity, trusted his intelligence, and sought his advice. He was a role model for all of us who have been fortunate to know and work with Jim, and we are enriched and better for the experience. Jim had the ability to creatively solve problems. I'll give you 3 quick examples. First, when he purchased Goodyear Rubber and Supply, he found out that 10% of his products produced 90% of his profit. He therefore got rid of the 90% that produced 10%. Second, in the late 1960s or early 70s, we were both on the board of directors of Neveh Shalom with Art. That's when I first observed how he really worked with people. As the cliche goes, if there are 5 Jewish people, there are at least 8 opinions. At these board meetings, and we had spirited discussions on some objects of the role of the rabbi, other professionals, and the Hebrew school. Jim would listen thoughtfully, and generally he was one of the last speakers. He would speak softly, and sometimes you would strain to hear his statements. He also was respectful of everyone there. He would synthesize the different positions or think out of the box and come up with a solution that was never mentioned. Generally, his ideas were accepted, and this resolved the issue. The third example of his creative solution involves the family, and I think it's really funny. Mark, Tom, and Rich were probably in their early teens. I guess you might say they were unbearable. And Jim and Laura were at wits' ends. Mysteriously, there soon arrived many brochures of military boarding schools. These brochures were strategically placed on the coffee table and Jim's reading list. As you can imagine, things settled down. Jim's devoted love for Laura is best illustrated by what happened last week in the hospital. Laura said to him, "I love you." He responded, "I love you too." Those were the last words he ever spoke. I would like to conclude by quoting from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. In the scene, Juliet is on the balcony, Romeo is in the garden, and Juliet asks Romeo to leave so her family would not find him. Juliet says, "Good night, good night. Parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be morrow." Romeo answers, "Sleep dwell upon thine eyes, peace in thy breast. Would I were sleep and peace, so sweet to rest." Unquote. Good night, sweet friend. Jim, may you sleep in peace, so sweet to rest.
The grandchildren. I'm not going to place you in order. Giving up on that one.
I'm Shauna. I'm Mark and Marcia's daughter and the oldest grandchild of Bubby and Grandpa. And this is Ezra, Avi, Noam, Dahlia, Orly, Ami, and Alex. And yesterday, we all got together at Rich and Erica's house to figure out what we were going to say about our grandpa, Jim Meyer, a giant of his community and the patriarch of our family. The meeting was supposed to be just a few minutes, but it became hours of telling stories, sharing memories, and lots of laughing. We loved our grandpa, we still love him, and we could talk about him for years, and we plan to. But for this setting, we decided that our memories and lessons really organized around 3 themes and 3 ways we are taking him with us in everything we do from now and into the future. These reflections will be read by individual cousins, Alex, Ami, and Dahlia. Each of them will speak to our collective experience as a family. We're all a pair representing each other, and we've done our best to weave together our individual experiences into a tapestry of our family and a tribute to Grandpa's life. The most important thing to Grandpa was family, so we wrote these as a family. These are 3 reflections from us. First, Grandpa as an investor in us and our future. Second, Grandpa as a lover of history and progress. And third, Grandpa as our grandpa.
I'm Alex, Marcia and Mark's son. Grandpa was an astute business person. He owned local businesses, developed real estate, and invested in the stock market. While he had a lot of success in those financial ventures, they paled in comparison to the success he had investing in his grandchildren. All 8 of us are so lucky to stand here today because of the foundation Grandpa laid for us. Bubby and Grandpa decided early to invest in our futures. For each grandchild's birthday, we'd receive a letter in the mail that wished us happy birthday and let us know that in honor of that day, Grandpa purchased X number of shares of a particular stock in our names. The stock always correlated with an interest of ours. For me, an athlete, he bought Nike stock. For Shauna, it was Nordstrom. For Ezra, Disney. For Noam, a small bookstore called Amazon. For Dahlia, probably a biotech company researching early-stage treatments for peanut allergies. I can't speak for my other cousins, but the investments he made for me over the years enabled me to buy my first house, and then my second. Bubby and Grandpa also made it possible for us to go to college, wherever we chose to go. We ended up in Boston, New Orleans, Atlanta, upstate New York, and Connecticut. They made sure there were no obstacles to get the education we desired, and I know we're forever thankful. From the start, by investing in our childhood interests to investing in our collegiate pursuits, Grandpa made it all possible. He also made himself available to us for any and all advice. Always calm and generous with his time, a great storyteller and a better listener. Whether it be for a choice between 2 classes, questions about jobs, or general life lessons, Grandpa was unafraid to open up his memory bank and network for us. He connected Shauna with Pete Cole, who offered Shauna her first job working at Gamblin Paints. When Ami interned in Washington, D.C., he emailed his good friend, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, to set up a lunch meeting. And of course, Earl answered the call. And when Avi began advancing as a musician, but needed a little boost, Grandpa pitched in for the Yamaha keyboard that Avi sleeps with today. I remember a lunch I had one summer with Grandpa. Because of an early hobby, building with Legos, he advised me to pursue investing in real estate, a journey I've recently begun. This past year, Grandpa became my business partner. An opportunity arose to purchase a house in need of a renovation in a great location near Tulane's campus. My friend Sam and I jumped at this opportunity, had our purchase offer accepted, and then realized that we needed a bit of financial help. Sam and I presented the project to Grandpa and asked for a loan. It wasn't easy to ask for, given that Grandpa had gone above and beyond investing in his grandchildren for our entire lives. But to my delight, he loved the idea. He was happy to help, and our renovation project is nearing completion. When I spoke to Grandpa in the hospital on Thursday, I showed him a wallpaper sample from the house. I'm sad he won't be able to see the final product. My business partner, Sam, never got the chance to meet Grandpa in person, and yesterday he sent his condolences to my dad. Here's what he wrote. I didn't know your father well, but I do know how much Alex loved him. He also raised a great family that I'm excited to grow closer and closer with for the rest of my life. The gamble he took on me, a stranger, is something that I will be forever grateful for. When we spoke over the phone, it became clear to me why Alex looks up to him after learning about all his business successes. and I looked up to him too. Jim Meyer left an indelible mark on my life by propelling me forward in the beginning of my career. Sam may not know this, but we all share his feelings. Grandpa always seemed to know how to steer people in the right direction, whether you were one of his grandchildren, his own children, or the community at large. We will all miss his advice, his investment, and his unconditional love. And as my dad showed me this morning, he has not passed, but he has passed on.
I'm Ami Fields Meyer of the Los Angeles Fields Meyers, Tom and Sean's son. Our grandpa was deeply rooted in tradition. The Jewish tradition, there was some lobster, but the Jewish tradition, of course, but also the tradition of American civic life. He had great reverence for a lot of institutions: the symphony and the museum, the government and the university. We today learned that he went to Harvard University, which is weird because he never mentioned anything about that. I understand it's a small liberal arts college on the East Coast. Grandpa also had a deep respect for history. He talked to us about the distant past, but also about the more recent past. He told the story about the day he visited the UN headquarters with his dad, who'd gotten the contract to install door closers in the building, or maybe door openers. We're going to have to learn more. He told the story of Bobby Kennedy's speech at Neveh, Shalom, and the story of his own visit to Israel when on a Federation trip he had greeted Soviet refuseniks as they came off the plane. He told these stories with extraordinary pride and with a superhuman level of detail, which I hope scientists will study and somehow explain to us how he did that. History was really important to Grandpa, and he wanted it to be important to us. He was blessed with a sense of civic romanticism. It was part of who he was. When he and Bubby went to visit Alex when he was studying abroad in France, the three of them walked through the rain at the cemeteries of Normandy. And when the Fields Meyers of Los Angeles visited Portland, Grandpa would drive us through town and point to a building or a park and offer the story of how it came to be. All of this showed us that history isn't some faraway abstraction, but something that's real and that belongs to us now. Grandpa made the past feel proximate. And the stories he told us and the experiences he shared with all of us made the idea of changing history and playing a role in history a little bit more feasible. But a lot of grandfathers tell stories about the good old days. So let me tell you what was so extraordinary about our grandfather. For all the glory with which Grandpa remembered the events of yesterday, he had just as much respect for the events of today. For all the reverence he had for the past, he felt just as intensely that things could and should change. And that we might be some of the people to do that. When Grandpa was in his 30s, as we were hearing the other night, he stood up and objected when Laura, our bubby, wasn't counted in the daily minyan, the morning prayers at synagogue. And in the last few years, he was really awesome about referring to all human beings by their preferred pronouns, simply and easily with no questions or commentary. When he and Bubby were moving out of the house on Summit Drive that we've heard so much about, it was important to them to move into a building that was environmentally conscious. And even in the past few months, he would sit with Orly and talk about the Portland mayor's race, soliciting her opinions about the city as he would solicit all of our opinions. Hearing my cousin's memories with Grandpa these last few days reminded me of something important he did for me. When I was in 10th grade and I had just started a political blog, and it was my first real foray into writing, and I'd spent hours writing these long, what I can now acknowledge were somewhat convoluted essays about whatever was going out in the world, and I really wanted somebody to read them. And very few people did. But one person always did. Grandpa. No matter the topic, he would send me a detailed response. If he disagreed, he would say so. If he had questions, he would pose them to me. But he always took me seriously. He took all of us seriously. And knowing that someone I admired so much took me seriously changed my life. We never really talked about that, but I think he knew the power of those things, because I've even heard people today talk about him doing that for them. In the last years of his life, I think the brokenness of the world and the bleakness of politics was challenging for Grandpa, like for all of us. But these people behind me, this group, from us, he drew a lot of light. He drew light from Orly's leadership in student government, and from Alex's building of homes and shaping communities, and from Shauna's extraordinary eye for beauty and art, and for Ezra's way of greeting the world with joy and love, from Avi's engineering brilliance, and from Noam's tour de force in music, and from Avi and Noam's music together, and from Dahlia's zeal for history and politics and people. But we only arrived there because with Bubby, he had put us on that path. We're only us because he had helped us see ourselves not as passive observers, but as active participants in our world. Something that he gave to our parents also. If we inspired him, it was only because he had inspired us. So I'll close with this. On August 30th, 2009, the day after Senator Ted Kennedy's funeral, who he had been at the same small liberal arts college with, Grandpa sent an email to a group of us, of multiple generations in our family. He admired Ted Kennedy, and he reflected in this email on the senator's life and accomplishments. But he closed his email by quoting what Joe Biden had said about Teddy Kennedy at the funeral. And this is what he said. This is what Biden said about Ted Kennedy. At the end of the day, it was never about him. It was always about you. Never about him, always about you. So it was with our grandpa, and that's our inheritance.
Hi, I'm Dahlia. I'm Rich and Erica's middle daughter and grandchild number 7. Though so many of you know Grandpa as the great leader, entrepreneur, and role model he was, we were lucky to know Grandpa as simply our grandpa. When you grow up with grandparents so close by, it's hard to pick just one memory with them, because Bubby and Grandpa were my life. I spent nearly every Friday with them. When Bubby and Grandpa lived on Summit Drive, Grandpa used to walk all of us around the house and let us help him wind his old grandfather clocks. Orly and I loved winding the clocks so much that we would ask our dad to drive us over to their house on ordinary weekdays to help him. It was a tradition, and Grandpa was big on tradition. Whether it was delivering roses to Shauna on her birthday, or raising the flag at the beach house on the 4th of July, or on Passover, Grandpa would always pass out silver dollars to those who helped look for the afikomen. You'd get 2 if you found it. And I still have every silver dollar he gave me because he told me these aren't for spending, they're for keeping because they might be worth something one day. Tradition and practicality. That was Grandpa. Recently, we started a new tradition where I would sneak Grandpa extra cookies at Shabbat dinner, even though Bubby was constantly telling him he had enough. Except, while he was a voluntary receiver in that tradition, he refused to pass it down to my dogs, Hugo and Moon, when they would beg him for challah under the Shabbat table. He would simply look them in the eyes while holding his challah and go, "Not for you." Grandpa committed himself to all of our interests, every single grandchild, which is evident through the carefully planned 10-year-old trips he and Bobby took us on, and the articles he would email each of us about obscure but curated topics. When he saw something that he knew one of his grandchildren would enjoy, he would send it our way. When the grandchildren were talking yesterday, we realized that all of us had hundreds of these emails. A few months ago, I got an email from Grandpa with the subject line, "Papa Murphy's Pizza Dog Commercial." There was no content in the email other than an image of a dog dressed in a suit and tie, sitting at a dining room table eating pizza with his family. And just to be clear, he had paused the TV and taken a photo of this commercial to send to me. When I followed up with Grandpa on the email saying how it made me laugh, he suggested I dress up my dog Hugo in a suit and tie and recreate it. All of us had moments like this. On the last day of Ezra's 10-year-old trip to Walt Disney World, Ezra informed Grandpa that he hadn't yet gotten to meet one of his favorite Disney characters, Pinocchio. So Grandpa and Ezra walked together all around the park until they found Pinocchio and Ezra could have a conversation and get a photo, which made his trip. It wasn't just the major interests that Grandpa paid attention to, but smaller ones as well. Grandpa himself loved watches and pens, not necessarily fancy ones. He loved the best, most reliable ones he could find. After years of research, he landed on a $20 Casio watch and a Pentel Energel pen. When my sister Orly took an interest in journaling and mentioned to Grandpa that she liked the pens he used, the next time he saw her, he showed up with a case of them. That was Grandpa. He was attentive and caring about everything, big and small. Grandpa always showed up. From Portland to Los Angeles, they were always on the sidelines supporting us. When Grandpa and Bobby visited my cousin Noam at Emory, they came to his choir rehearsal and had a memorable conversation with the choir director, and Grandpa complimented his energy. Though he was never able to visit me at Tulane because of the pandemic, he still found a way to participate in my classes to an extent. He and Bobby alike were fascinated by my professor, Walter Isaacson, and when Professor Isaacson hosted a community lecture at Tulane, they were the first to forward me the information saying, "We will be joining, will you?" Grandpa was our rock as a family. When he spoke, everyone listened. He was wise, strong, and humble, but he was also caring, witty, and playful. He laughed with us, he laughed at us. We saw Grandpa cry from laughter after jokes we made, and we saw him cry when he witnessed us doing things we loved, like Avi and Noam playing piano for him. He was there for us during our biggest ups and biggest downs, showing pride when we accomplished big things and also when we failed. Grandpa was proud of me for many reasons, but one of the things I think he was most proud of was that I happened to be born in November of 1999. What's so special about November of 1999? To the ordinary person, probably nothing. But to Grandpa, it meant the possibility that his granddaughter could live in 3 centuries. Each birthday, he would remind me that when, not if, I turn 100, I will be that much closer to living in 3 centuries. While he knew he likely wouldn't be there with me, he made sure that I knew when it happened, he would be proud. That was who Grandpa was. He saw each of us as larger-than-life, unique, and wonderful grandchildren and human beings. And it's hard to imagine that in just a couple weeks I'll be turning 22 and I won't have Grandpa there reminding me about our 3-century goal. But I know that he will always be with me, cheering me and all of us on in spirit.
This is a Jim Meyer event, so we'll close with a story. Grandpa loved current events. He started each day with 2 newspapers and closed each night with the evening news. One time at a Shabbat dinner 10 or 15 years ago, someone asked why Grandpa had never run for public office. He said, "I've thought about running for office. I think I would really enjoy it. I like the work. I love helping people do good things. So why not do it?" we asked. He looked at Bubby and looked back at us And he said, because I can never remember anybody's names. But across so many communities, many people will remember his name. Jim Meyer was a Baal Shem Tov, the master of a good name, a name we will carry forward with pride and with joy everywhere we go and in everything we do. We are so grateful, Grandpa, for investing in us, for showing us what it means to be open with the world, for loving us with all your heart. We love you so much, and we will always be grateful to carry your good name.
A family of writers and speakers. It's nerve-wracking to be the rabbi. But I'll give it a try. On Thursday night, well, I think Tom and Sean were at the airport getting ready to fly here, I got an email from Tom that said, you might be interested in taking a look at this. And it was a 36-page, single-spaced interview that Jim had done for the Oregon Jewish Museum for the Oral History Project. It was a board meeting. So, of course, I opened it up right away and started reading. It's on Zoom. I needed to do a little bit of learning. On page 9 or so of this interview, Jim says, all progress depends on fanatical people who are committed to something. All progress depends on fanatical people who are committed to something. Perhaps we won't call Jim a fanatic, or maybe we will. He was committed to family, to helping people, and to Judaism in a way that throughout his life he used to build the fabric of community. We've heard bits and pieces of his history, but I'll put some of these pieces together in chronological order. Jim was born in Boston in 1936, moved to New Hampshire for about 12 years with his family, then back to Boston, the oldest of 3 siblings. And his father was a businessman who traveled quite a bit. So often it was Jim with his mom, his sister Honey, and his brother Les at home. In a classic family story that Jim shared in this interview, he said his parents were notified that he got into Harvard in the following way. His sister Honey had left a note on the table. Mom and Dad, Les has the chicken pox and Jim got into Harvard. It works. It was during that time at Harvard in his freshman year where he met Laura, and they were set up on a blind date. They went to the movies, and they watched the best years of our lives. Those years since, including 63 years of marriage, certainly could be described that way. Jim and Laura married 10 days before he started at Harvard Business School, and Laura was then a senior at Wheaton College. She commuted for an hour 3 times a week each way, while he attended business school for 2 years. When it came time to graduate, Jim and Laura decided that they wanted to spend a year or so out west. A year or so. At that time, everyone who'd gone to Harvard Business School wanted to work for big companies, but not Jim. He wanted to work for a small company. He wanted to have his own company someday. A fanatical person, committed to something, and he did just that. Laura and Jim arrived in Portland 4th of July weekend in 1960, knowing not much about the Portland area or the Jewish community. I think there were 3 articles or 4 articles they could even find. But he had an opportunity very soon after to own his own business, and he did. When they arrived in Portland, Laura was pregnant with Mark, and they were looking to find a way into community. Through a series of connections around town, they ended up at Ahavai Shalom. But Rabbi Stamfer was on sabbatical, and so they had to wait for him to come back in order to meet him. Then one night, there was a phone call. Rabbi Stamfer was back and invited them to come to dinner that night. So they show up to dinner, and the suitcases are still around the house after the sabbatical, but Goldie and Rabbi Stamfer were there, committed to that work of building community. And from there, with Jim and Laura, connected them into a social network, helped them to find other friends, welcomed Mark into the world. And the Jewish connection in the Portland family, as we all know, was sealed then and continues today. We know Jim served as the chair of the Federation Board, as well as on several other committees, Jewish organizations, and not throughout our Portland community. But it is thanks to him, thanks to Jim, and the way that he asked questions, thought deeply about the world, that so much of Jewish Portland exists in the way that it does today. That leadership, that love of community, not only sustains our larger community, but served as a role model for his boys. Jim described himself as a collaborator, as one who does his best work in partnership with others. And his partnership with Laura was by far the most fulfilling and successful. Jim, always intentional in his actions, put Laura first, preferring to be called Laura and Jim Meyer and not the other way around. And when they spent time as a family at the coast, Jim always sat with his back to the view so that Laura could have that view. Or perhaps because Laura's seat was closer to the kitchen. We can choose how to understand that. Together, Jim and Laura welcomed Mark and Tom and Rich into the world, and were even more blessed to then welcome his 3 daughters, Marcia, Sean, and Erica. They were truly daughters for Jim, because family was not defined purely by blood. It was the way that connection built love. A guiding influence. Jim, on the board, always home, a part of the family. It's no wonder that you look at our Portland organizations, Rich, the president of Neveh Shalom, Mark of PJA, Tom, Camp Ramah. What Jim taught his boys was how to live and lead with an open heart, to lead with patience and intentionality. The ultimate pride, though, are the people who were just standing up here, his grandchildren. From individual trips to celebrate birthdays to always being available for a phone call for advice. As you heard them say, Grandpa was a calming, supportive, and loving presence in all of their lives. Jim was a connector. The family describes him as a collector of good people. He was a good listener who asked the hard questions to help whoever came to him for his advice. But with Jim, the conversation wasn't done when you hung up the phone or left the lunch table. Jim would often keep thinking about the issue at hand and follow up with a call days later just to share another piece of insight as he continued to think about it, even if you'd already made your decision and moved on. On Sukkot, Jim joined the family at Rich and Erica's sukkah, and in the tradition of the moment, he wrote down a goal that's on the fridge, a little quote that's still on the fridge today, to help good people get to where they want to go. Fanatical people creating progress out of commitment to each other. That was Jim. On Saturday night, I was honored to be invited into a Meyer Fest, to come and sit with the family. There was good food, there were drinks, there were stories. But before we sat down to reminisce or continue reminiscing, we did Havdalah. And being in that space, I was drinking it in. We say the blessing of Havdalah, Hamavdil bein Kodesh L'chol. This moment of making something that is holy. Thank God who has the ability to change something sacred into the mundane. And Ami wrote on Facebook that yes, that holiness, that Shabbat left, and on Shabbat, his grandpa passed. But I thought about that blessing, and it felt in that room that nothing had diminished. In fact, the strength and love and commitment continued to grow and build. The blessing of Jim was his ability to go from Chol to Kodesh. His presence in our lives, his presence in the world, took us from a place of Chol and elevated each person he met, each community he was a part of, to have just a little bit more Kadesh, holiness, in it. We learn in Pirkei Avot, who is wise, he who learns from all people. Who is rich, he who rejoices in his portion. Who is honored, he that honors his fellow human being. This is Jim, that Kodesh that he brings to our world. He learns from others and listened. He rejoiced in family and community and honored so many. And so in this moment, we say, Yehi Zichro Baruch. May Jim's memory and his legacy live on as a blessing to each of us, and may we find the spark of holiness that Jim ignited so often and continue to pass that in his honor. Amen. I'll invite you to rise now for the El Malei Rachamim prayer be chanted by Noam. You need to see your name? I got it right there for you. You're good. Okay, thank you.
El Malei Rachamim Shochein Bamramim Hametzeh Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina V'malot Kadoshim V'torim Kezohar Harakia Mazirim Et Nishmat Avraham Yitzchak Ben Rachel V'Moshe Shehalach Leolamo Began Eden Tehei Menuchato Ana Bal Harachamim Yistoreu b'seter knafecha leolamim Utzror b'tzror ha'chaim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato Ve'anuach v'shalom al mishkavo Ve'nomar Amen.
Exalted, compassionate God, Grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Jim Meyer, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. I'll invite you to be seated. At this moment in our time together, we turn to the final mitzvah that we do for one another, the mitzvah of burial. And so I'll ask you to stay seated as we allow the family to make their way over to the cemetery so we can continue in these rites of love and tradition. Thank you. Thank you.